Under the heading Massive Classified Military Document Leak, there are actually two incredible and important stories battling for your attention today. The first is, of course, the story of the substance of the leak. Now, it's precisely what can be found in those 90,000 plus documents obtained and posted by the website Wikileaks. But the second story is the story of Wikileaks itself, the story exactly how and by whom all this classified information about the war in Afghanistan was revealed. And it's both a fascinating and really super important story because WikiLeaks is trying, and at least to some degree succeeding, in transforming the way journalism works and what freedom of the press means in the most practical terms. Let's start with what it is. WikiLeaks is essentially the first ever stateless news organization. It operates by using, in the deepest possible sense, the nowhereness of the internet to wage battle against the secrecy that is so central to how governments and companies all over the world operate. The site was launched in December of 2006 by this guy, Julian Assange, an Australian internet activist, who describes it as, quote, an uncensorable system of untraceable mass document leaking and public analysis. The classified Afghanistan war documents published this weekend are just the latest in a series of explosive posts that have raised the profile of WikiLeaks. Last year, the site published the so-called ClimateGate memos, a series of emails in which British climate scientists were caught talking smack about climate change deniers. And in April of this year, WikiLeaks obtained and posted this now infamous video showing a 2007 U.S. airstrike in Baghdad that killed a dozen people, including 2 Iraqis who were working for Reuters. Incidentally, Reuters had been trying for years to get a copy of the video through the Freedom of Information Act when WikiLeaks posted it to the internet under the title Collateral Murder. In other words, because of what Julian Assange is doing, something like journalism, but deliberately not exactly journalism, we are living right now in a transformative moment. How journalism works, how freedom of the press works, and how governments all over the world are held accountable could all change in months and years ahead because of what's going on right this moment at wikileaks.org. Joining us now is Jenny Jardin, co-editor of BoingBoing.net. Jenny, thanks so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure, Chris.
You guys have written a lot about WikiLeaks, obviously, on Boing Boing, and I know that you've been in touch with them today, so I first want to ask what you've learned from them today.
So I spoke with a representative of WikiLeaks who is in Europe, and they told me that these last 15,000 documents, there's been a lot of speculation about when they'll be released and what they'll contain. I know that some journalists have speculated that they might contain information related to the war in Iraq. I just got an email 10 seconds ago that says that these relate to Afghanistan as well, but they're taking time to redact names and specifics that could increase security risk. They're basically doing this in an effort to be as responsible as possible.
This responsibility is kind of a fascinating question in this context, right? Because when you had, when you had the Pentagon Papers, the White House went crazy that the Times published it, but the Times had a relationship with them. They went to them. In this case, the Times had a meeting at the White House. We know when it was reporting on the documents WikiLeaks had given them. WikiLeaks has no such institutional or national affiliation, and so there is both a kind of radical openness, but I think maybe some concerns about damaging or information that comes out, names of frontline soldiers that could really endanger lives. How much of an effort do you see from them in trying to, as you said, be responsible? What does that mean?
I think the first thing to remember is that this tension that you're talking about between the government, between the military, and the press is not something that started today with this disclosure by WikiLeaks. This is something that has gone on for decades. What we're seeing now, though, it really strikes me that this is like what Napster did to the entertainment industry. It's like what BitTorrent did to the movie industry. WikiLeaks represents a sort of tipping point in control, in secrecy, in the dominance of institutions that we've known for generations over the control, the flow of information about what's happening with war, war that we're paying for, This is so much bigger than Julian Assange. It's so much bigger than WikiLeaks. It's interesting to see so much of the discussion focus on these guys, but what we're talking about is one of many possible organizations that could spring up to perform this kind of service.
Yeah, and I should note that this is all taking place against the context of a massive explosion in the amount of classified documents since 9/11. So there's been, while this is happening at one end, while this WikiLeaks is one tool, there's also this massive move by the state to bring things more more under this sort of secret protective curtain. But I do wonder, I think, Assange sort of reminds me of the WikiLeaks operation of Ben Kingsley and sneakers. Remember this kind of sort of radical vision of openness. And I do, this is the same group that published Sarah Palin's emails. They published, obviously, the stuff that came out of East Anglia with climate change. I do wonder, if there is a certain amount of power that confers, and it's one thing to get documents about a state that's waging a war, and I agree this is kind of remarkable. It's another when those are the private emails of someone. And, I wonder ultimately to whom WikiLeaks ends up being accountable.
Well, it's possible for anybody to publish secrets online. The difference here is that WikiLeaks has a big platform that a lot of people are paying attention to. I don't think they realized how powerful they were. I think over the past 6 months or so, we've seen them grow up in some important respects. They've certainly applied some restraint in releasing this material, or so the statements would lead us to believe. I think, for me, what's most interesting and most concerning about where the story goes from here is what kind of backlash we're going to see.
Yes.
The government, big institutions, wanting to crack down on leaks like this in ways that we have never seen before.
Jenny Jardin, editor of the famous BoingBoing.net, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Chris.